Hello, I'm Jason King, Beirne Chair and Director for the Center for Catholic Studies here at St. Mary's University. I'm here today to talk with Dr. Marina Alessandri. She is an Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. She's the author of Night Vision, Seeing Ourselves Through Dark Moods. She came to us to talk to our first year experience as students. And in our conversation, we talked about stress, anxiety, anger, frustration, Mr. Rogers, and the future of Catholic higher education. We had a blast, and I hope you enjoy this conversation in Beyond the Lecture. Welcome. Thank you for coming here today for a talk and for your book, and sitting down for an interview with me as well. So I just wanted to have just a brief conversation and have you tell me a little bit about how you got to be a professor of philosophy in a university.
I never thought I was going to be a professor of philosophy. When I got to college, I had to take a philosophy class, and I loved it. So then I took more, and I took a lot of religious studies classes too. And I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And I luckily did not have parents who forced me to figure out what I wanted to do. And so I graduated with, I thought I was going to have a computer science minor or double major, but then I got a C, and I was like, oh no, I don't want to do that. And it was hard, and I wasn't that interested in it. So I did religious studies and philosophy. And I was like, well, maybe I'll go to graduate school, but I don't want to teach, And so it was such a slow process. I ended up taking 2 years off. I went to California. I built homes with Habitat for Humanity. So I didn't know always what I wanted to do. I just knew that my time away, I was like, oh, I want to study philosophy more. And I wasn't sure between philosophy and religious studies. And I told myself, well, if at the end of your philosophy degree, if you still want to study religious studies, you can go back. I would just be like an endless student.
Yeah.
So I went and I got my master's in philosophy at American University, to DC, yeah. And then, because I still didn't know if I wanted the PhD. And it felt great not to have pressure of what are you doing with your life, It's just oh, I'm just studying more. And then when I was at American, I was like, oh, I want a PhD. And I still don't know if I want to teach, but I don't have to. I just want to keep studying and write a lot. And so I went to Penn State. And then after that, I was like, oh, I don't want to go back for another PhD in religious studies. But it felt like kind of really difficult decision, So I am the coordinator of religious studies at my university because I always want to sort of keep a foot in it. But
is the department together, or is it just?
It's together. It's a minor. We don't even have a major in religious studies, so it's not even called philosophy and religious studies. It's just a philosophy department, but we house the minor. But I still didn't know if I wanted to teach. And then they force you, when you're a grad student, to start teaching. And I resented it, but then I loved it. Once I started teaching, I was like, oh, this is what I want. They're just people, right?
Yeah.
I don't have to be so scared of them. So I really liked teaching, and I was like, oh, I can do this then. Let's see if I can get a job. And I was lucky enough to get a job. So that's how I got in.
That's pretty funny. Mm-hmm. I was a math major in college, same thing. And I was just good at it, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I remember my math professor that just loved math, thought about math all the time. That's what I want, trying to figure out what that was. And I picked up a philosophy major because that's what I was that's what I was reading outside of class. But my philosophy professors were like, your questions are religion. And so that's how I kind of went there. Yeah. Huh. And so I took a year off, and I found, you mentioned being off for 2 years and working for Habitat, and I was a volunteer in Chicago. And that was helpful for me. It was just hard. I think it would have been hard to keep going without at least something to help me to think or take a break from school all the time.
Yeah, and I think it sometimes gets posed as a break or something negative, but I'm the experience you get actually helps with your applications because you're learning things about the world, and you can put that on your application and it makes you look different. So I always don't try to push students right into grad school. I'm like, what do you have that's different? If you need time, take it, and it can be a really positive experience for you.
Yeah. My brother was an English major, went into computer science. My mom was a business major. She went into elementary education. So I had a nice kind of background of all of those pieces. I tell this one story in the middle of the pandemic. My kids were home. My son, who was in 7th grade, they asked him what he wanted to be, and he said a forensic economist. And I'm like, what in the world? And so I asked him afterwards. really? He's like, no, I don't know what I want to be. I just made that up. I'm like, okay, now you're good.
It's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's circuitous routes are really kind of
Yeah.
wonderful in this sort of process. Part of the reason why we invited you here is for your book Night Visions. So can you talk a little bit about how you kind of came up with it, a little bit of the writing process, how you arrived at where you were?
So when I had my second baby in 2014, something got sparked in me, something creative that I hadn't really done, which was, I remember I was sitting in the pool at my friend's hotel. She was in for work to my hometown, and we were sitting in her pool, and I was like, oh, I'm going to write an article for the New York Times. And she was like, okay. And I just was, because I had looked there, they used to have a thing called The Stone, and it was the philosophy column.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a friend who published in there, and I was like, oh, well, I know him. I could do that too. And like, I just had this boldness about me that I was like, I want to write. I remember I was breastfeeding all the time. So I was like, I want to do something creative. I want to think. I want to write. I was doing a lot of reading. I needed something to not just be like the mom, you know? So I started writing, and I just wrote something. I wrote a piece on in favor of complaining. Because I'm a New Yorker, and I think complaining gets a bad rap. And so I was like in defense of complaining, and it just worked, and they accepted it, and it came out. And then I got 2 agents like asking me if I wanted to write a book similar to the theme, and I said yes. And so I picked one of them, and I wrote a proposal for a book on like, I don't know, feeling bad is pretty good or something like that. And in 2014, this was when Obama was still president, no pandemic. And I was proposing a book on like hopelessness and all the negative emotions. And like, not surprisingly, nobody wanted it. Everyone was like, oh no, but we're full of hope right now, right? Like we don't need it. We're not angry, you know? And then in 2019, we tried again with a different version, but still the same idea of like, let's defend these kind of negative moods that people kind of poo-poo. And in 2019, we're ready. Like it was like, still wasn't the pandemic, but it was already Trump, and whatever side you are on the Trump thing, like there was more anger in the world, much less hope, just like
tension.
Tension and stuff. And so it was like, oh yeah, we want that now. And then by the time it came out in 2023, it's like, oh yeah, we're totally ready. Like people have changed on anger. And so the book is about anger, sadness, grief, depression, and anxiety. And I'm trying to see them through a more forgiving light. I think when we're looking at them with the bright lights on, they just look like diseases and mental illnesses and bad things that we're supposed to like erase from our lives. And I wanted to defend them and say like, people who are anxious are not broken people. We're not, like, even if you want to use the mental illness language, like we're not only mentally ill, like there's so many, not just benefits of the emotions, which is a different book that I would not want to write. Like The 5 Gifts of Your Depression is not what I'm interested in. It's more like we're human. Like the person who lives with these moods is keyed into the world in a way in which other people aren't. And so we're not less valuable than everybody else if we happen to live with very dark moods.
I want to comment on that, but I remember reading the introduction, you said you were like a Eeyore. And I was like, started to run through those things like, oh, I'm a piglet, right? Like there's this kind of, and so that when I was like, oh, this chapter on anxiety, that's at the very last one, like, oh, that's where I am. And
that's interesting.
Sometimes it's hard to even, you're talking about like, one of the things I took from your book is like, as a society, we don't talk about these things very well, and we're told kind of not to. And it wasn't until I had kids, I've got 3, and they're very different, that seeing those things in them, different moods and emotions, like, oh, that's me. Like this is this, I see what they're doing because I've done this 100 times too. And which gets me to the thing that I wanted to, one of the themes that I really liked in your book is this, both those emotions are enable other people to connect to you, but are also who you are. Like those are the 2 things that I thought, like if you're somehow not recognizing them, not wrestling with them, it's a loss of self, it's a loss of connection that's there. So that piece, I think, that human piece of holding all those things together was one of the things I really sort of liked.
Yeah, there's so much that we miss when we only see the bad side of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, they're painful. They're not moods that we kind of go into willingly. They often overtake us. But if we're just trying to get rid of them or overcome negativity, if you just look at self-help, like it's all full of like, let's get rid of these things. Mm-hmm. And I just think, oh, well, like if we're looking at Kierkegaard, he's like, well, then you're getting rid of humanity. Like these are actually the things that allow us to connect with one another, connect with ourselves on a deeper level, think about the world in not just this kind of Pollyanna-ish kind of way. It can make us more realistic. Like there's many ways in which, reasons why a person would want to defend them. And about what you said earlier, we get a lot of advice from the self-help world and from just like social media about like we should talk nicer to ourselves. You know, like there's like a book about like how to talk to yourself or something like this, and it's like you are down on yourself and you should talk nicer to yourself. And what I want is for the world to talk nicer about us. I want the world to talk nicer about my bad moods, because I'm reading the writing on the wall. Like I actually don't think I'm making up that script. I think I'm seeing how other people, like there's no nice words for anxiety. There's no nice words out there for depression. So if I suffer with these conditions, or I mean, even the word condition, like so many things, if I live with these moods, I am made to feel from the outside like I'm broken, deficient, something's wrong with me, you know, less than human, or all these things. And so I just want to say, it's not me doing it to myself. I haven't created that like harmful narrative. I'm just reading a world that doesn't speak nicely about us. And so my book is not self-help insofar as I don't give any homework. There's not like, oh, you should do this. You should think differently about yourself. It's like, no, recognize like the world isn't talking nicely about you. And so I want to change the lens. That's where I think I'm a philosopher about it. Like I want to change the lens and do a critique of the society in a way that sort of Socrates did a critique of Athens. Like, let's see how is the world talking nasty about us, and try to figure out if there's a way that we can help the world talk nicer about us rather than me just working on myself. I think that the project of self-help would take forever to get each single individual to work on themselves. It's like we have a societal problem here. It's not an individual problem.
And there's a piece of that too, both in the book and in your talk today, where there's that underside of it too, is this kind of shame about the things that you're feeling, or it's your fault if you're not if you're not happy, if you're not having sort of addressed those things, which is that structural or that cultural piece that kind of shapes your imagination. Like, oh, not only should I not feel bad, but then I feel bad about feeling bad, or I'm stressed and then I shouldn't feel stressed. Don't be stressed; it'll all be fine. And then you feel bad about sort of being stressed. And
yeah, I mean,
it's
like if I have a doormat that says no bad days or good vibes only, then I've set myself up, right? If I'm even buying the stuff, like the world puts the stuff out and I blame the world and I want all those things to stop being made, all those posters, all the pillows. But then when we bring it into our own house, we're setting ourselves up for failure, because as long as I'm happy, then choose happy works for me. And it's not offensive to me. Like, I'm like, okay, choose happy sounds great. I chose my happy. But as soon as I'm sad, then choose happy. Whose fault is it that I'm not happy? It must be mine. If I am subscribing, if I'm logically consistent and I'm subscribing to the same philosophy, then the underside of it is that I didn't choose happy. And I think that's toxic positivity. Like I want to like banish that from my house. I don't want any of that coming inside. I want it to be like, to be human is to be light and dark. To be human is to have dark moods. To be human is to be happy and sad. I want to accept all of it and not as opposites. I also love the realm of bittersweet, like what Susan Cain is doing with bittersweet, because they're often at the same time. And I think when we describe ourselves as just, are you okay or not okay? Yeah. I don't think that captures us, because it could be, you know, like my mom died in the summer, and it's like, are you okay? What does that even mean? I don't know what you mean by that question. Like, I'm grieving and also I'm laughing because my son said something funny. Like, we're so limited in the way that we talk, like in our society, but I think we need to get like a more complex set of words to use to describe our moods and ourselves, and not have everything reduced to like, this is some departure from humanity when things aren't like going right. Like, I'm like, this is all part of life.
I was thinking too, too many thoughts, but
that it's also like, you said it better, but like your pain, my pain is your problem, like that dynamic here. And so now, I just moved and I brought my kids and they're teenagers. And I was like, oh, how are they doing? And I don't know how to answer this question because I want them to be doing well. I want to say they're great. It's like everything's wonderful, right? And then if they're not, I also feel like, oh, I brought them here. It's my job, and this is the transition. And it's this, as I watch them and talk to them, it is complicated. Like there's things that they like, they're happy about, and the other things that they really miss and are sort of sad. And I don't want them to be sad and trying to, but not trying to step away and kind of let them have that complexity of sort of emotions.
And it's not your fault.
Yeah, I know.
Because they'd be happy and sad at your old home too. Yeah.
Well, that's true.
It's true.
Yeah.
So like, this is why I've stopped asking people, how are you?
Yeah.
I feel like the question, even if it's well-intentioned, it doesn't give enough room because it gives choices. Like, are you good or bad? So it's more like, unless you're ready to have a real conversation about how a person's doing or how your kids are doing, you can't sum it up. Except to say, I don't know, like when my father died, my mom everyone was asking her, how was it? And she said, sad and sweet, sad and sweet, sad and sweet. And I thought, oh, okay, that's nice. Bittersweet, or, pros and cons, like anything that expresses that, like, to be human, like, let's lower the bar for us. Oh, they're perfect. Since day one of our move, they've been nothing but happy. Like, we could almost make fun of it, like, nothing but happy. Like, that's crazy. So I want to just lower the expectation and just allow ourselves. And so I think how are you doesn't really work. I think even just the expectation that your desire that they just always be happy, like, I don't know, like who is,
It's oftentimes too, it comes from love, right? That you're noting in the talk. Like people want things well for you. And that is the broader cultural piece where, love means you're happy all the time. And that's not. And
the converse, which I think is even more nefarious, you're a bad father if they're sad.
Yeah.
And that is really, that actually causes us to ignore their pain because it's too deep. So then it's like, oh no, they're good. No, hold on a second. Like if you could dissociate your being a parent from their mood, like it's not about you. It's not, like, moves are hard. Like it's not ultimately like your fault. Like
this was such a pivotal moment in my teaching. I mean, I feel like I have to learn that lesson, like, oh, it's not my fault all the time. But I remember when I was a young teacher, this student doesn't like me. Oh, they're not doing their work because it's something about me. And that, like, hurt. And then I was, you want to retaliate, you want to do something. And my family was always very gentle, so I didn't, but there was that impulse I felt. And then I was on this academic status committee, and you're looking at these kids, and you realize, like, there's a whole team of people, and you're looking at their grades like, oh, they're doing bad in all their classes. And then, someone on the team would be like, oh, this is what's going on in their life. You're like, oh, this has nothing to do with it.
Totally.
They probably had not, like, they were probably trying really hard to get something in, and I've taken it this real personal level. And it causes that harm if you take it that way.
And there are teachers who I just find so, I don't know if brainless is the word, but almost just like, you're lazy. Right? The quick assumption that a student is lazy, I'm like, or they are working full time and have a lot going on. And, like there could be 1,000 reasons, but why do we go to that one? Because it feels like ego. Like it feels like it's a personal affront to me if you're not doing well in my class. And so, but back to your thing about kids, that's what they also, so my mom died in the summer and my kids were living there. She was living with us on hospice. And after she died, like people would approach my kids as though they hadn't been through it too. They'd be like, how's your summer? Are you enjoying your time off?
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, what are you saying? Like, what do we say to kids? Like, it's almost like we just assume them, like they're quite resilient and whatever, but we sort of assume that they weren't affected by this thing. It's like, well, they also had their grandma like die in their house. Like, it's such a weird, like we're very inept at dealing with one another's emotions, especially on that surface level of like, how are you? Just please say good.
Yeah.
Right. Like we just want someone else to say good and then we can walk away.
Yeah. If it's just like the kind of mechanism for social hello.
Yeah. If we could just say hello. I mean, now when people ask me how I am, I'm just like, I don't know, what hour? Like right now or tomorrow? Like it just feels like way too big of a question. Sometimes I don't even know. I'm like, I haven't even thought of it. I'm just going through my day. I'm hungry. I don't know.
I just remembered this too. I was thinking about kids and the high pressure, and my youngest son's trying to, he loves soccer, and he's starting to get into these more competitive teams. And he went to this big tournament. He's like, he played and they lost. He's like, I want to watch this game afterwards, because it was these like young kids, but these pro academy teams. And this one team was like, had a name recognition of a fancy club, and the other team didn't. And like, oh, this is going to be sort of interesting. And it's clear that this, professionally affiliated team which should win. And halftime came, and they were down 1-0. And you could hear, so I'm sitting with my son, you could hear the coach berating them across the way. And so I was like, what do you think is going to happen? It's like, my son said, oh, that team's going to collapse. The other team's going to win.
Wow.
And it did. The game ended like 4-1. The other team just beat it. They just kept coming at him. And it was just like, and so we were set the whole time talking about this, but it was this, the coach had no way to kind of accept the fact that they were sort of struggling. You have to be perfect. You have to do these things. You're better than them. And then they just kind of couldn't manage that and sort of,
And then think of it like on a parental level.
Yeah.
I've heard the like horrific things. We didn't come here for you to lose. Yeah, we didn't drive all this way. Awful, yeah, it's like, wow, like talk about ego getting in the way of just like it's supposed to be fun or whatever. Like
any value that sports had is usually lost, like the kind of sense of teamwork or striving or winning
or practice,
and losing.
Right? Like this is practice. Like.
But all of that gets kind of lost as soon as it becomes career paths or parents' identity.
You need to win.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, and there's no room for that kind of like emotions. Like even when you like are doing well, like you might not be happy about it.
Totally, yeah.
So, and that, I don't know where I'm shifting now from sort of sports, but it got me to kids, and it got me to think about your op-ed piece on Mr. Rogers, a bad day in the neighborhood. Say a little bit about that. I'm a big Mr. Rogers fan.
Yeah. I am a big Mr. Rogers fan too, and
tell me how you get into Mr. Rogers first. Yeah.
So when my kids were little, I wanted to show them something and have kind of, I don't know, experience with me, but I didn't know what. And I thought, well, let me check out Mr. Rogers. So I think I watched it a few without them, and just to see. I remember when I was a kid, I was like thoroughly bored by Mr. Rogers. Just like, what is this? And I would always try to change it to Channel 13, which was Sesame Street, or just like want Sesame Street to be on.
I was always like, can you get to the puppets? Can you get to the puppets?
Yes. Yeah. And so, but I was like, you know what? Like, I think he might have been saying something because he was so slow. Like he was countercultural. I read Neil Postman and just his kind of critique of television, and just like anyone trying to go against the medium, I find incredibly interesting. The fact that like Mr. Rogers will take like a minute of silence on air. Yeah. Like it's like, that's not done. Like you're not supposed to do that. Like television's supposed to be really fast. And so I was like, he's kind of a philosopher in there. Like he's got ideas about how to use the medium, So I'd watch a few, and then I was like, oh, it's amazing, because I didn't know how good he was on the emotions. And he would teach me things. And since then I've bought like his books, and I've, listened sometimes to his audio books where other people will read his little passages. Just understanding that kids are humans with a whole range of emotions. And one of the things I love that he says is everyone has feelings, and every way of feeling is fine. And then it's what you do with those feelings that really matters, right? So it's just, I wanted to create a foundation in my home to be not just like tolerant of the emotions, but super welcoming of the emotions. Like these are all really normal feelings. And it's really hard when it's, 9 p.m. and they're really mad or something, or they like, are like, it's not easy, but I do feel like Mr. Rogers has helped in my house create the ambiance and the expectation that feelings are really normal. Like you never have to be ashamed of feelings. That would be silly. Yeah. Whereas I think in a lot of other houses, like it's that idea of like, go to your room when you're angry and don't come back until you're smiling. Right? It's like banishing anger. Or, the classic one is that boys can't cry or something like that. You're a big kid now, you shouldn't cry. Yeah. So when they would come home with that stuff from school, I'd be like, wait, what? And then we would watch Mr. Rogers, and I feel like it really won out. And so I wanted to write about him because more and more I started thinking of his philosophy as Aristotelian. This, namely the idea that we don't really control our emotions. Aristotle isn't trying to make us control our emotions like in ways that I think the Stoics believe that we have full control over the internals or feelings and opinions, judgments, etc. But Aristotle is more like, what's the behavior? What's the behavior? So with the kids, like I know my husband did this thing once where they were bicycling home from somewhere, and the younger one was just like agotado. He was so like tired. And so he's crying and he stopped biking. And my husband was like, well, you have to keep going. Like, we have to get home. So you have to keep biking, but you can cry while you're biking. And that's like the Aristotle, Mr. Rogers, like, I'm not denying your feeling. Like, you can feel that. And I'm not even saying you're wrong. I'm not saying, what's wrong with you? We came out to have fun. No, you get to have that. Like, we all get like that. And also you have to still bike. So I wanted to write an essay that would sort of show how philosophical Mr. Rogers is, as opposed to just this like nice old man. Or it's like he was so intentional with every episode. It's like full of amazing emotional intelligence, and he was actually helping kids. And I don't know what we have today that's like that for kids, that actually respects them as full human beings with a full range of emotions. He doesn't deny them any emotions. He's like, you feel all the emotions that adults feel, and so we have to like be, I don't know, like generous to children.
Yeah, it's when I did a little bit of work on Mr. Rogers and the environment, and he was sort of dealing with the environmental piece and the fear that it causes. Like, it's so big and it's so overwhelming, and he sort of set up these pieces, and it wasn't never a sense of like, don't be afraid, it'll all be fine. It was two things that he kind of pointed to. Here's some things other people are doing, but, look around, see what other people are doing, and here's some things you can do too. And it was that kind of triangulation of like, you're not alone, you can take action, and this is your feelings, and sort of holding those pieces together.
Yeah, and we're not totally powerless, but we're also not totally in control. Like, he was definitely not a positive thinker, anything like that. And so what happened was, I saw a Google Doodle. I don't remember when it was. It must have been for a birthday. And it was a Google Doodle of him, and it was totally wrong. Like, from my actual interpretation of his work, it was really like someone was crying, or maybe it was like a little video, a sketch or something, one that you could press play on.
Yeah.
A baby was crying, and he handed them like a balloon, and then the baby got really happy.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, that's not him.
Yeah.
He doesn't go for the cheap. He doesn't say cheer him up. Like, that's to disrespect someone. It's just to be like, let me shove some cake in you. Like, that's not helpful.
Some explosion, some pie in the face, something like
nothing.
that. Yeah. And I sometimes wonder that it's one of the reasons why that's not recognized is people filter their understanding of him through when they were kids. Those that think about him at all, they have this impression. I know I had a kind of simplistic impression when I started to watch the shows. I was like, oh, this is because I'm just thinking of him as I took him in as a kid, not at these sort of levels that was sort of operating here.
But then, I mean, that there would be a deep read there if that's true, because what they should be then remembering is how he accepted their emotions. Yeah. But if it's empathy going on, then what they're feeling is that he made them feel better by not giving them balloons.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like it worked too well.
Yeah.
That like they feel they know that he's like a comforting person, but precisely in not trying to be a comfort to you, or just like telling you that everything's going to be okay. Like,
that's interesting. Yeah, because it's not and they just have projected on like, oh, it's the balloon guy that gives us stuff, and that's just not it, even though they're identifying the empathy that's what happened as a result of it. That would be interesting. Yeah, I did a lot of and as you work through those archives, it's just very interesting, all of the different issues that he dealt with, both from big ones to small ones as well.
Like, I would look up these clips, and I am really grateful that there's so many clips you can find online, like really short ones. And one of my favorite ones is like something like, smile when a smile is natural, and don't smile when a smile isn't natural. Your face as it is exactly right. And it like tears me up, because it's just like, if we could pass that on, whatever you're feeling is right, or whatever you're feeling is not subject to judgment, that you don't have to smile through the pain. Like, if we could teach our kids that against a world that's basically like telling us that we should be always smiling, or if we're not smiling, something's wrong with us, or we've done it wrong, like you failed at life. Like, it's like, wear a smile when it's natural. Like, your expression, whatever it is just the right one. Like, whew. Like, how many times do we tell kids to smile for photos? Yeah. Like, I kind of love it when my kids don't smile, and I'm like, yeah, you don't. Like, why would you want to act for like the anonymous other?
Yeah. It's I'm just thinking of different family sort of dynamics too, because my family tends to be very optimistic and gentle, and so we struggle to sort of articulate emotions. And one of the things that attracted, I realized that it's to my wife, but it's also my friends are like, it's people that I'm attracted to, people that are more direct, like people that I can, oh, I feel like this way, or I'm upset about this, and being able to sort of deal with those emotions sort of straight on is
It totally makes sense.
relieving,
Yeah.
right? That's what.
Like, how do you do it?
Yeah. It was not this, because I felt like that pretense of trying to make everything happy.
Yeah.
I could feel that, and the directness was like, it's
Yeah.
kind of relaxed,
And
because you can be honest about what's going on.
I feel like the opposite in that, like, well, like the yous of the world who are sort of calm and gentle by nature are like held up as like the good ones.
Yeah.
And I feel like the me's of the world, like fiery and just mean and like, explosive, are like you're not as good. And I'm always in this sort of defense mode of like defender of the people who have strong emotions, defender of the people who are quite sensitive to the world. I love the wording that Gloria Ansaldúa puts to it. People who are excruciatingly alive to the world. And it doesn't have to do with directness, but it's almost like the people who are sort of super receptive to things are not worse than everybody else. We're not deficient. And even direct people are not worse. There's pros and cons, right? There's times to be super gentle and like, but also I used to envy people, right? Like, oh, when people tell me that they don't fight with their spouse, I'm like, I can't be friends with you. Like, I don't understand like how you exist in the world. Are you lying? A, are you lying? Or B, like, why not? Like, I don't understand. And yet it would make me feel deficient, like, oh, we fight a lot, I guess I'm bad, So it's just like the whole process of my writing is always an attempt to not feel bad and not feel like my way is deficient, even though it sort of looks gnarly. It looks like less mature or less worked out than the rest, but I do feel like there are benefits to being blunt. I've been thinking about my mom recently. She's super blunt and just hilarious. And I'm like, oh, I like that. Like, it's not a dig, it's actually like a bonus, so.
Yeah, it's more honest, like in some ways, and it's hard to get to know people with that sort of image or that sense of optimism is up all the time.
And like, I can't break through to people like that. I'm just like, you're an alien. I don't know how to like pick at you, or like, I don't know. So.
Yeah. My last question is, all of those are wonderful, but you talked also sort of about culture. And one of my sort of ongoing questions or my ongoing thoughts is I feel like society's changing, and that's a neutral statement, just the kind of descriptive things that used to work 4 years ago, 5 years ago, things that I assumed were going to always be the case, like in the 90s, like clearly not working sort of anymore, and higher ed's changing and stuff like that. And it's scary, but there's also kind of opportunity. So and you're in philosophy and higher ed, what do you think about the future going forward? Where do you see higher ed going? And I try to, maybe this is my optimistic spin, what ways can it sort of serve students 5, 10 years, 15 years down the road?
Well,
that's a huge question. I know.
Yeah.
I'm worried about all of these things at the same time. And here's the location I have here at the school, that all of us have at the school. And like, this is our kind of realm to sort of do A, B, or C.
I think on the question of philosophy, the health of philosophy, it's like writ large, I will worry when philosophy starts getting closed at Catholic schools, because I feel like Catholic schools have preserved philosophy because they believe it's important. And so like my nieces and nephews who have gone through Catholic college have to take required 2 philosophy classes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's amazing. So I feel like it's the bastion, it's like the protector of philosophy for us. So I'll worry when Catholic schools, like I'm used to it when other secular schools start losing their philosophy programs, because I understand how in, I guess, the neoliberal world, like it's not very valuable on the face of it to be a critical thinker.
Yeah.
So when other departments stop, drop philosophy, I'm like, okay. But if Catholic schools start dropping philosophy, I'm going to be like, oh, they actually believe in it. They actually believe in the power of thinking and history of ideas and logic and all this sort of thing. So that will certainly worry me more. But as for my own personal situation, I'm at a university with 23 philosophers.
Holy cow, that's wonderful.
We're huge. We almost just doubled our majors because we opened like a pre-law program or pre-law track.
Mhm.
And so it's like thriving where I am. So I'm kind of insulated from the rest of the country where it's like people are losing their jobs or whatever. I mean, in Texas, tenure is definitely under threat. So that's worrisome, but that's a personal thing. That's not about philosophy per se.
Yes.
So I think about my investment in philosophy for students, especially students like mine, is a kind of a social concern, which is that the way that Gloria Anzaldúa put it, she was getting interviewed by a woman who was American Indian. And Gloria Anzaldúa said to the woman, well, we were never supposed to write. She was supposed to be picking cotton,
Yeah.
So just taking that, and it's like, nobody expects philosophers to come from the valley. And so what I want to do is like show the world. So when I'm teaching and like trying to really help the students do research and think and come up with ideas and write, it's like, I don't want to accept that like your job, because we do have a lot of nurses, a lot of teachers, a lot of help, but it's just, we're 90% Hispanic. So it's like, no, but also you're philosophers. Like, this is what a philosopher looks like. And so, I think about my students when I'm writing and talking to them, because I'm like, people don't expect people who look like us to be philosophers. And so we're going to show them that we are, so I'm always encouraging them, whether it's to go to grad school or, just to continue if they want to not think, well, that's not for you. That's for somebody else,
That's so funny. When I went to college, I was like, oh, I'm good at math. I should do math. Math's a prestigious major. Like, oh, you should do all of those things. I did checked all the boxes, right? And it was my philosophy teachers who were we had philosophy classes, but it was very much a dialogue in those classes. So the way that they ran those classes was formative to me, just to help me to think like, what is this train that I'm on in these checks? And that's for me too. Like, this was that piece when I'm doing my teaching. You're moving forward. Just take a minute to think about why? Like, if you want to do this, that's great. You want to be an accountant? That's great. What are you imagining here? What's the life? Where does this sort of come from? Is this something because you've always loved numbers and you like accounting and you're reading those things and sort of open up those possibilities of reflection?
Here's another example of where the wrong people are sort of attacked or disregarded. So when I have a bunch of students, like a class, several of them will know exactly what they want to do, right? They have their head down, they're on their track, they're just right, whatever. And then I have most of them who are like, I don't know what I want to do. I'm confused. I don't know what I want. And the confused people are all made to feel like wrong for being confused. Like, you should know by now, like, what are you interested in? You're changing your major again, this sort of thing. But what I tell them to try to give them heart is like, those people who have their head down, who seem to have it all together, they're only doing that because they're scared. Yeah. Like, they're ultimately not probably going to stay in that. Like, the amount of people who know what they want to do when they're 14 is not a lot. And so you guys are like kind of admitting that you're scared and that you don't know and that you're confused. And that's like exactly where you should be in college. So instead of thinking of yourself as deficient because you see those people ahead of you, the people that are ahead of you, they're going to face it when they're 25 or 30. Like, it's going to bite everyone. Everyone is going to have this existential crisis, which is why it's not bad to have these moments where you're like awakened by dread, awakened by, like a real sense of, what am I doing? Why am I on this track? The people who don't ask themselves that eventually will probably be fed up and be like, because I never asked myself. Yeah. I never knew what I really wanted. I just did that because either my mom told me or because I was good at it or whatever. But we are going to have reckonings with ourselves in the end anyway. And so tell these ones, you guys are actually ahead of the game because you're doing it now. Yeah. And you're going in with like eyes open rather than just like head down.
And it's sometimes those darker feelings that can tell us like something's wrong.
Yes.
Like, I followed this tracks, but like something's wrong.
Exactly.
And as long as I had attended to that.
As long as we're ignoring the darker feelings because they're bad or wrong, then we're not listening to them. Mm-hmm. Because the listening is what's going to get us to understand a little bit more about ourselves, what scares us, what moves us, what we love, what we hate, Yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you for sitting down with me. I really sort of appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.